Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Leadership Academy for Mid-Atlantic District. This session is for Chapter President. Doug Brown will be presenting to us today, and he'll be talking about what we have to consider because this has been a slightly unusual year. Doug, thank you so much for agreeing to be here and to do this. I look forward to your sage wisdom again.
Well, hopefully you'll say that at the end of the session as well.
I absolutely will.
Knowing that this year has been such an unusual year, I've actually modified slides specifically to be able to give you things that I've been talking to company executives about from May until now. So you're literally getting what I think to be the best I can really give you. Hopefully you can all hear me if I talk at this volume, if I can just kind of get some kind of a thumbs up or a nod of a head, just so I know that I'm coming through adequately. It looks like I'm good. So thank you. The first thing that I'd like to ask is just kind of go around the horn a little bit, knowing that we only have 2.5 hours, and I don't mean that sarcastically, because I've got enough content to go hours and hours and hours beyond that based on, this is what I do professionally. I work in the world of executive development with everything from micro businesses to, I've done leadership development and those kinds of things with the Florida legislature and the Florida Highway Patrol, and strategic planning with the U.S. Army up in New Jersey, and the Army Research Labs down in Maryland. And so we're not short of resources on this particular call. Kind of getting us started, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and do a couple of things. And yeah, I'll make sure that since I have I think I have email addresses for all of you, I can certainly send out any handouts or coordinate those through Rob as appropriate. But I'm going to ask you to not only think about the concepts tonight, but more importantly, I'm going to ask you to think about where is what we're going to talk about actually apply. Because while there's a statement that says knowledge is power, I really consider that a half-truth. Applied knowledge is a power. So unless I can kind of follow you around and see where you're actually putting this stuff into practice, I'm not so sure that that knowledge without application is any better than ignorance. In terms of the crazy guy who's hosting tonight, I started Paradigm back in June of '85. I've got people in multiple states. I go from Albany down through North Carolina and Utah. We've now done leadership and development programs in more than 70 different industries, from everything from small mom and pop to, as I said, the U.S. Army, large organizations like Nabisco and Case New Holland and all that kind of good stuff. I work an awful lot in terms of strategy. My own personal sweet spot are organizations between 50 million and $1 billion is really where my own personal sweet spot is. But obviously I do an awful lot of work with groups other than that. When I'm not doing that kind of stuff, I'm singing currently with 2 choruses. Voices of Gotham out of Manhattan, and I'm wearing a hat there of membership VP this year, but I have been a chapter president for Voices in the past, and I also am coaching and singing with Somerset Hills Harmony. So that kind of keeps me occupied and off the streets. Life before that, I've been a Mid-Atlantic District Board member. I was a Society Board member for 2 years. For 5 years, I was chairman of the Society's Leadership Task Force, which was basically an internal consulting group to both the Society Board as well as what was then 16 district presidents around the U.S. And so I've led all kinds of strategic planning initiatives for that as well. Life before Paradigm, I came out of 2 manufacturing companies, the smallest of which was about 800 people, where I managed a staff of 100. And before that, I was part of a small consumer goods company you may have heard of called Procter & Gamble. And between those two stints, I guess I'd written or edited about a dozen training and orientation programs and generated a couple of million in cost savings and production improvement ideas and drove inventory level down. Life before that, I'm a graduate of the University of Delaware, down the road a little bit. And you're talking to a guy who is insane enough that 3 weeks into my freshman year, I went to a meeting on a Sunday night and walked out assistant national convention chairman for a student-run corporation. And that gave me a lot of exposure on Delaware's campus and became the first freshman ever elected president of the resident students, which was about 6,500 kids at the time. That gave me some national exposure. And by the time I was a sophomore, I was regional director of 13 states. By the time I was a junior national secretary treasurer, swung into the fraternity system and ran the fraternity system at Delaware. But by the time I was a junior, two significant things had happened. I ended up with an internship in the US Senate under Bill Roth, as in Roth IRA, Bill Roth, in an undergraduate research grant to study leadership styles versus group behavior. And that's really where the seeds were sown to be in this particular business. I got to admit, if I hit the lottery yesterday, I'd still be on this call with you because I love what I do. I'm really excited to have you guys on the line. And so with that, let me just kind of roll on. What you're going to see over the course of this initially is really the same kinds of things that I'd be doing if your corporate executive team was hiring me to work in terms of the executive development realm. So just to kind of putting that out there. So one of the things I think is really critical is that you keep an open mind. Quick show of hands, how many people think they have an open mind? Good. Ron's not so sure, but for the most part, I saw the hands go up. All right. So take yourselves off mute for a second. If all my lines are straight and all my angles are right angles, how many squares do you see? Anybody?
30.
30? Good. Keep going.
Lot of squares.
A lot of squares.
There is a formula.
That's right. But that formula is not going to be as good as you think, Bob. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not. So with any luck, you all see the 16 squares. And believe it or not, on two different groups, I've heard the name, the first number I heard was 12. You just can't make this stuff up. It's honest to God true. But you see the 16 squares. We've got the large square, 17. We've got the four quadrants, 18, 21. 19, 20, 21. Mm-hmm. We've got the inside squares, 22, 23, 24, 25, one dead center, 26. If we start to expand our thinking out a little bit to 3x3s, 27, 28, 29, 30. And for those of you who are thinking of this as mathematical, 4 factorial, 4 squared plus 3 squared plus 2 squared plus 1 should give you 30. However, there's also 16 white squares inside 16 blue. That gives 46.
Oh, that's cheating.
We have the word square. That's 47. We've got the square at the bottom.
Yes.
So that gives us 48. And when I do this on silkscreen and for a trade show, where those lines cross, if you blink, you'll find that they'll actually go to gray. Or some kind of an odd color. That gives us another 9. And of course, that gives us at least 55, 56. Now, the reason why I start out with this particular illustration is that depending on who you read, the average person uses somewhere between 3 and 25% of their capability on a day in and day out basis. And so if we're running our barbershop chapter or our company, or quite candidly, our life, based on the 16 or 17 squares that we see right away versus whether you call it 30 or 46 or 55 out there, how much opportunity is sitting out there that we're just not capitalizing on? We've got an expression in my business that we drive by more business than we drive to. And so part of this whole process that I want to ask you to join me on tonight is kind of stepping back and taking a kind of a fresh look at what we're doing and how we're doing it and who we're doing it with. On any piece of paper that you have handy, Would you draw these nine dots in front of you? They don't have to be particularly big, but would you just go ahead and draw these 9 dots? Using 4 straight lines, would you connect all 9 dots without lifting your pen point off the paper and without retracing any line? Using 4 straight lines, would you connect all 9 dots without lifting your pen point off the paper, and you will not have to retrace any lines? If you're struggling a little bit, would you challenge what assumptions are you making about solving the problem? How many people?
Yeah, the assumptions, yeah, right. That you can't go through them. You start and then yeah.
Well, probably also that you have to stay within the
grid.
rectangle itself, and you can't go outside of it. I'd imagine you have to go outside the rectangle, right?
Correct. So here is a way of solving the problem.
Right. Outside. Yep.
Now, how many times do we try to solve a problem by operating within a box of our own making and then saying, damn, life is hard?
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you're struggling, I'd like you to think about tonight and ask yourself, is it possible that I could be making some assumptions where I literally am handcuffing myself? I see this all the time in organizations. And I can tell you where some of that comes from later on, but for now, I want to kind of use that as kind of a way of kind of freeing you up, if you will, in terms of kind of being able to get maximum use out of this, our time together tonight. If the top of this funnel represents 100% of things we're exposed to, articles, blogs, TV, news, books, you name it, because of our natural disposition to prejudge and use old models or old paradigms, if you will, that we're lucky if we get a 10% value of those ideas that we were exposed to. But imagine if we could flip that and let the top of the funnel represent input from all kinds of sources. By really engaging ourselves and using our creativity, imagine the new opportunities that we could see that we've just never been able to take advantage of or to look at before. The other thing that I'd like you to do is understand and embrace change. Before we move on, would you take your fingers and would you interlace them the way you normally would? And would you pay attention to whether your right thumb is above your left, and whether your right thumb is left thumb is above your, and whether your right index finger is above or below your left? Would you take your hands apart and put them back the other way, please? How's that feel? Really kind of strange, right? So at the risk of sounding like Jackie Mason, that old comedian, I've come down from the mountain and the secret of success in life is instead of doing this, do this. Have a nice day. But if I ask you to put your hands together, how are you going to do it? So if something as innocuous as going from this to this gives us a feeling of discomfort, imagine if I asked you to lead differently than you've led before. So part of this truly is giving ourselves permission to learn. This is a graphic I've been sharing with company leaders throughout the COVID time period. And I think it certainly applies to both you as a human being, as kind of as well as a chapter. That you can certainly read it. It's pretty straightforward in terms of kind of what it says. What I see as particularly critical is our role as leaders as people are kind of coming down this pathway here, if they haven't hit there already, and as they're kind of swinging through the bottom, I fully accept and expect that people are kind of going to be going back and forth a little bit. And part of our role as leader and servant leader is really helping them to kind of see their way clear and kind of be up this, come up this other side. But I would ask you to pay attention to when you're talking to individuals within your chapter, where do you think they are on this curve? And to what degree, where do you think your fellow members of your leadership team are? Is there an overarching thought process that I would kind of, if I was kind of observing your leadership team, kind of where I would see it purely as an outsider? And kind of where do you see the folks on the risers? I came across this phrase, and I think it just reflects so much of what people were going through, both in the summer as well as kind of going into the fall: allostatic load. And it refers to the mental and physical effects of constant exposure to stress. What's it lead to? Forgetfulness, mind fog, apathy, detachment, and so on, as well as people kind of getting stuck and almost not knowing which way to go forward. Don't be surprised if some of the people that you know and love are going through their own version of allostatic load, that they're just not as sharp, as they would typically be. And I would say, well, congratulations, they're human. But as leaders, we need to be sensitive that this really is going on. And again, that people can kind of come in and out of it. So just because somebody was okay 3 weeks ago does not necessarily mean that they're okay now. And so really kind of staying in tune, if you will, with what's really going on truly is really critical in terms of our role as a leader. Law of process. Up here in quadrant 1 is when we're unconsciously incompetent. This is when we don't know what we don't know. And then we cross the bridge of discovery. And now we're consciously incompetent. Now we know what we don't know. And then we cross the bridge of training, if you will. And now we're down in quadrant 3. We're consciously competent. And I guess probably the poster child that I use for that one is probably when teenagers are first learning how to drive. They're with any luck, they're really paying attention to what they're doing. They're checking the mirrors. In the old days when cars used to have clutches, if they were going up a hill, they'd be learning how to balance clutch and gas going on, on a steep hill and so on. And then we go from quadrant 3 into quadrant 4 via either development or across the bridge of habit formation, if you will. And now we're up in quadrant 4, which is where most people would think that they would want to be. This is when we kind of operate in autopilot. We're unconsciously competent. We don't have to think about driving a car. We don't think about having a tire shoe. We do it in autopilot. The challenge that I have is that the longer that I've been working with execs, the more I believe that it's not what we know that kills us, it's what we think we know that we don't. And probably the example that I use most frequently on this one is the Swiss watch industry. At one time, the Swiss had order of magnitude close to 80% market share in terms of watch and watch manufacturing. And somebody had invented the integrated circuit and went to the Swiss and said, hey, we got this idea for you. But the Swiss in their wisdom said, hey, thanks, but no thanks. You don't get it. Watches have mainsprings. And so they took that technology over to the Pacific Rim and talked to little guys like Seiko. And ultimately, the Swiss watch industry was decimated. It went from order of magnitude 70 to 80% into the low 20s. And it wasn't until the Swatch got introduced that it started to come back and approach that 30% mark. So when the paradigm shifts, it shifts in a huge way. And so what you'll see there in the center of the slide is the slide of complacency, that we don't always question what assumptions we're making. We're not always questioning, is it possible that what I think to be true may not be true? And without that, we really find ourselves in quadrant 1, even though we suspect we're in quadrant 4. The longer you've been doing what you're doing, the easier it is to be kind of gone down the slide of complacency without even recognizing it. It's a true trap that I see in execs all the time. One of the things that's certainly going to be critical in any year, but this year is no different, and that's to what degree can you really take a look at kind of where your chapter is, and just kind of without taking it personally, and just kind of saying, hey, where we are. And I think that's really critical, particularly going into this year, again, to not have any kind of rose-colored glasses and just kind of be able to call it the way it really is. Because if somebody called me and said, hey, Doug, how do I get to Kansas City? The first question that I would have to ask them in return is, where are you calling me from? Because there's a different set of directions if you're calling me from Portland, Oregon versus Portland, Maine. So wherever you are, you are. But again, let's not get wrapped around the axle. It has nothing to do with whose fault or why we're here. It's just, let's just kind of start from, this is where we're starting from. I love this one. The first rule of holes is, when you're in one, quit digging. We've got to come up with a new way of solving the problem. So doing more of the same is probably not the right answer. Are you structured for innovation? I came across this cartoon earlier this year. It kind of resurfaced, and there's an awful lot of organizations that I've worked with over the course of time that may as well have this as their informal org chart. And if you'll notice down here in the bottom right hand corner, the manager of new growth and ideas happens to be vacant. Again, we started out with being able to look inside the squares and being able to see things that we don't always look at. How are you going to structure your board this year to wrap your arms around innovation? What are you going to do differently this year versus kind of doing more of the same? Kind of moving on a little bit into strategy. Why is an organization in business? So many people tell me make a profit, but I love the other piece of that, which the purpose of every organization is to attract and maintain satisfied customers or satisfied clients, or satisfied, in our case, satisfied members and patrons, while generating adequate resources today and improved resources in the future. Over the course of time, I've worked with a lot of organizations that are wonderful at bringing people in the front door, bringing customers in the front door, but they don't have a lot of processes in place. And so they'll lose them out the back door as fast as they bring them in. I've worked with other organizations that are wonderful when it comes to customer retention or client retention. And man, once they get them, they hold on to them forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. But what they're not so good at is being able to attract new. And so I love the fact that this is really kind of a balanced look, that it's both attracting, kind of acting as a gigantic magnet, if you will, that you're attracting both members as well as patrons into your organization. And like an incredibly powerful electromagnet, what are you being able to do to keep them at the same time? If you were in charge of your organization, we can either operate based on luck or planning. And for those of you that are in the military, I was working with a client of mine who is a former colonel, and he had a great expression that I asked him if I could borrow on permanent loan, and he gave me permission. Without a plan, all you have is hope, and hope is a bad plan. What is strategic planning? It's basically a thought process. It's really the process of determining kind of what the future of your organization is going to look like, and what organizational resources are going to be needed to be able to achieve organizational goals. This year, because of all the changes on so many foundational levels, I've asked people, instead of talking about the new normal, in fact, I'm going to swear you all in to join me if you don't mind. From this point forward, I'm only going to ask you to talk to your people in terms of the new reality. Because I'm always afraid that when people start to even think about new normal, that it's hearkening them back to a time that I'm just never sure is going to be completely like it was. I think there's a lot of things that are in place now, and not necessarily bad ones, that I would continue to think are going to go forward. I don't think that they're going to revert. So I'm thinking that we're better off really calling the new reality as we move forward, and recognizing that we're always going to be dealing with change. We're always going to be dealing with facts and circumstances that are moving either in our favor or against us. But we have to take all those into consideration as we run and manage our chapter. The other thing that I came across that I really love is, as a president or as an exec, your value isn't really dependent on predicting the future. Most people's crystal balls are just not that clear. However, the second part of that phrase is something that I absolutely do believe in, that it is our responsibility to frame the right questions, even when we don't necessarily have all the answers in terms of what's going to happen in the future. It's all about thinking through various scenarios and thinking about alternatives while we have enough time to be able to do something about it. And that is a huge difference in my mind between proactive leadership versus purely reactionary leadership. As I talk with people about kind of this horizon, if you will, historically, people have kind of thought about this from a logical perspective. This is where we've been. This is where we are now. So we're going to think about the future as kind of as an extension of the past. Coming out of our session tonight, though, I'd like you to instead embrace the willed future. That if this is where you've been and this is where you are now, the future is anything that you will it to be. If you and your board and your chapter members decide that you're going to do something, who is going to stop you? I mean, from a practical perspective. So really kind of embrace this idea of thinking about what is it that you really want. One of the things that I always talk about on these sessions with chapter presidents is you can kind of go into this year with one of two major thought processes. You can go in with the idea in mind of, what do I need to do to just keep the lights on, so to speak, for another year? Kind of, what do I need to do to survive? That's one way you can approach your year as presidency or as president. Or you can say, what is it that I want to do so that we really thrive and this becomes part of the best year ever? So much of this is really going to be driven by you, your thought process. How well are you able to enroll others around you? And I'm not looking at this through a Pollyanna kind of rose-colored glasses thing. For some organizations, it is much tougher than others. But I'm still convinced that if we always focus our energy in terms of what is that we can do and not just what we can't, that is a huge, huge perspective to take into consideration. As you begin to form your team, and every time you add somebody to a team or take somebody away, there's going to be an interpersonal connect, if you will. And you're going to go through these four phases of team growth, dubbed forming, storming, norming, and performing. When you first add people, or on a call like tonight, when everybody doesn't really know each other all that well, kind of at the personal level, hey, will I be accepted, as part of this group, this work group, or this chapter, or this team. You'll watch people kind of being polite. Nobody's saying anything controversial. Isn't it nice we're having weather? Nobody's bringing up anything that's really kind of unusual, and kind of as a group getting oriented. At the storming level, it's, hey, will I be respected if I really put something out there? You'll watch people begin to bid for power, and as a group kind of get organized. At the norming level, it's, how can I help? What is it that I can do? What is it that I can bring to the group or the team or the chapter? And you'll watch genuine cooperation, and people will start to look for data. We've got an expression, in God we trust, everybody else brings data. What are the numbers really telling us in terms of kind of where we can really kind of go with this? And finally, at the performing level, how can we do better? It's kind of moved from I to we. You'll watch genuine enthusiasm taking place and watching people really engage in creative problem solving. As we're going through this is what you can expect from both personal as well as organizational results. That if this is where we're starting over on the left, well, I'd love to be able to tell you that the world operates based on that dotted line, but it's absolute horsehaki. That's not the way things really happen. So anytime we make a change, there tends to be a little bit of a euphoria. Ooh, how cool is this? I learned something, and so on. Followed by, wow, this is not going to be as easy to implement as others. And I call your attention back to the time when I asked you to interlace your fingers. If I said coming out of tonight, you'd never be able to interlace your fingers the original way, you could only do it the new way. Yeah, you'd eventually be able to learn how to do that, obviously. But up until that time, what you used to be able to do in automatic, you now have to stop and think about. And so you're going to actually see a decrease in speed and a decrease in results. I want you to understand that is perfectly normal in terms of the change process. My colleagues and myself refer to this as the universal change curve, that every time we make a change, we can expect to live through this. And the real key is when we're down here in the middle of storming, that is not the time to bail out. Because if you do, it's the equivalent of changing the y-axis to here and saying, okay, well, this isn't working. You know what we need? We need a new plan. And then the curve would do something like, whoop, and now you're down here. And say people say, well, this isn't working. You know what we need? We need a new plan. Shift the axis. Now all of a sudden we're going, and now we're down here. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is, if you've taken the time as a result of tonight's work to really craft a good plan, please, please, please give it enough time to be able to work and succeed, so you do have a shot at coming up through the norming and the performing levels. So again, this is kind of the overlay in terms of kind of how you see this, and the storming level is what corresponds to what's going on down here. If you will, on any piece of paper you have handy, would you get in your mind's eye something that somebody who comes as close to an ideal leader as possible? And if you'll jot down, let's say 4 or 5 characteristics of that person, what makes them such a great leader? I'm not interested in terms of who the person is, but would you please jot down their characteristics? Bob, if you'll just give me one, please.
Collaborative.
Thank you. Chris?
I said listens intently.
What'd you say?
Listens intensively.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Nice guy.
What?
Dave?
Empathy, that might be the same thing.
I'll take that one as a new one. Steve?
Communication skills.
Thank you. Steve?
Calm.
That one I didn't hear.
Calming.
Oh, calm. Thank you. Jay?
Accepts feedback.
Bob?
I'd say take advice from all sides.
Thank you. Ron?
Authentic.
Thank you. Dave? Dave Sepple?
Yeah, organized.
Thank you. Paula?
Recognizes the accomplishments of the team members.
Thank you. Grant?
Leads by example.
Thank you. Heidi?
Enthusiastic.
Got it. Rusty?
Encourages.
Thank you. Rob?
Genuine.
And Ken?
Vision for the future.
And Boyd, I see you're still on. I think Boyd's still on. Unless he's checking out from Walmart. Okay. So.
Sorry. Yep, I had it on mute. I'd say leads by example.
Got it. So collaborative, listens, empathy, communications, calm, accepts feedback, takes advice, authentic, organized, recognizes the accomplishment of others, leads by example, enthusiastic, encourages, genuine, and vision or visionary. Taking a look at that list or thinking about that list, how many of those characteristics were people born with and how many of them were developed?
0 born with.
So they're all developable. And when you think about those a second time, how many of those attributes, if you will, are directly related to our attitudes? I'm seeing some head nods, so that's a good sign.
Mostly all of them.
Right. Most if not all. So then it becomes, so it kind of takes the notion of he or she is a born leader and kind of throws it right out the window. We've basically said that they're all developable, and most if not all are directly related to our attitudes or our attitudes. So then the question is, who has to own our attitude, right? It's almost like before we go pointing the finger at somebody else, we got to kind of look at where the other three fingers are pointing. We got to own it, if you will. Think about that when it comes to developing other people as well, because that's the theme, if you will, that I'm going to start to move us into for kind of going forward here in a second. When you think about as a chapter president or as an executive period, when you think about the skills that kind of come with the title, if you think down here that this is tended to be at the kind of the individual contributor level or the singer on the riser level, kind of supervisor or section leader level, middle manager or VP level, and finally the senior execs, if you will. As we move up through the organization, yes, we certainly need some technical skills. There's no question about it. But nobody is going to ever say that Lee Iacocca was a great chairman because he knew how to put a bumper on a Chrysler. That's not why he was getting paid. So part of this is what are we doing to really develop our people skills so that we're really becoming all that we're capable of becoming? And how are we doing that? How are we encouraging the development of people skills at every level of our chapter? At the individual feet on the riser level, through section leaders or administrative leaders, all the way up. What are we doing really to muscle build the organization from that perspective? I really see the chapter president as really being the person who's up in the crow's nest, being able to kind of take oversight responsibility. To some degree, you could almost say that the president is the only chapter officer that really doesn't have a portfolio. And while that's not exactly true, if you think about thinking about your job as more of an oversight or overseeing type of a role, I believe you're probably better off. From a book called FailSafe Leadership, they've described a leader as a person who sets goals and achieves results. And leadership is about following processes that lead to the desired outcomes. The simplicity of that, if you buy into that concept, that a leader is a person who sets goals and achieves results and follows processes, then now we can go in, we can start to really think about who in our organization would we not want to start to think or to develop as a leader. So everybody can lead from where they are. And that gives us more capacity to be able to get more things done. And we'll certainly talk about that as our night continues. And we can encourage more people in our organization to become leaders. For those of you who have had some formalized leadership in the past, you might recognize this from the Hershey Blanchard situational leader model, that when we bring somebody in and we basically bringing them in, we would name these quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we would go counterclockwise from the bottom. When somebody first comes in or when they're first taking on a role, they're typically providing their own excitement when they're saying yes. So they don't need a lot of excitement or a lot of support from us because they're providing that internally. However, because they don't know what they don't know, they do need high direction. When they're going through the storming phase, if you will, and things are not going as easily as they thought, their support, their internal enthusiasm, if you will, starts to flag. And so from us, they need higher levels of support, encouragement, enthusiasm, and so on. But they're not out of the woods yet. They haven't mastered what it is that they're trying to do. So they still need high direction from us. Kind of do this, yep, then go ahead and do this, and kind of stepping people through it. Once they've gotten some success behind them, they know what to do so that they don't necessarily need that from us. They've demonstrated mastery. Depending on when they first get started on that, they may or may not need high support from us. And if they know what to do and there's an overall willingness to do that, they actually need low support. This actually translates into different leadership styles that we absolutely choose to use with them. So when somebody is down in quadrant 1, when they don't know what they don't know, I have to play the role of director. Do this, do this, do this, and I'm going to be able to keep them on a pretty short leash. Then they're struggling. They haven't mastered it. Now I become the role of coach, where it's a combination of both chief cheerleader for them, as well as I still am not giving up this director role. If they're going through some rough times, but they've shown that they can do it in the past, I'm more likely to have to play the role of supporter. And then last but not least, I can play the role of delegator. What is absolutely critical, though, is up here in this corner. This is always, 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 always by the task that you're talking about, and it has nothing to do with somebody as a human being. It's not about the task. I mean, it's not about the person, it's about the task. So for example, if I was working with Rob France and I was talking, and Rob is an amazingly competent person, but if I was talking to him about something that he knew nothing about, regardless of how much competency he shows in every other aspect of his life, on that particular task, I would have to play the role of director. I'd have to recognize that in this particular task, he's at quadrant 1. We might both wish that he was someplace else, but that doesn't change the situation of the way he's really operating. So on this particular task, I have to play the role of director. If this is something that Rob has done in his sleep, I know that that he's a geek on steroids in terms of the stuff that he's done. And I know that because I've asked him questions and he's answered my questions brilliantly in the past. If there was something like that and I could say, hey, Rob, is this something that you could do? I could use a total delegator style. Basically say, what if any help you need from me? He would say none and we're off to the races. What I find is that most people flip between 1 and 4 in terms of their leadership role. They either become the micromanager director from hell or almost total abdication, total laissez-faire, but they don't understand that they can make choices throughout this continuum. It's not just delegated to get it off of my plate or have to micromanage the crap out of you in order to be able to get things done. You have other tools in your tool bag. And coming out of tonight, I'm going to ask you to use all of them. And again, when it comes to people, since we talked about kind of enthusiasm and support, I love the phrase that's been around for years that there's a huge difference between involvement and commitment. And when I was asking somebody, well, kind of what's the difference? They kind of gave me kind of a quirky answer. And they said, well, just remember a bacon and egg breakfast. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. That there's a big difference in terms of the level of engagement, if you will, in terms of being able to do this. Oftentimes, if I ask people to really kind of take a look at how are they interacting with their people in the organization, whether it's back in the days when you had straight work or within your chapter. To what degree is it possible that you could be thinking you have commitment when you really only have had involvement? Just because we let somebody know what's going on, that might be helping push the envelope towards involvement. That's not necessarily the same as having their commitment. And I would ask you to take that into consideration as you're continuing to lead and manage people. Defining success. In my organization, we keep it real simple. It's the continual achievement of your predetermined goals. It's not about the continual setting of them. It's the continual achieving of them. So I set it as an SET. I set it, I do it. 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 And the reason why I believe so strongly in that is if you're constantly setting goals for yourself and not hitting them, even if you have his and hers Mercedes and a house on every continent, you're not going to feel successful. If you're constantly setting goals and hitting them, you're going to feel successful. Most people are not that good at setting themselves up to lose in the sense of running headlong into a concrete wall time after time after time after time and never getting tired. So we have to give both ourselves as well as everybody around us, we have to give ourselves the ability to cross the goal line, if you will, and kind of feel that success. So it's not about the striving. So this year, knowing that this year is going to be potentially amazingly challenging, the same way 2020 was, what can you do to set your organization up for success? Now, I'm not talking about just doing something like, if you fog a mirror for the next, from now until 2022, I'm not saying that you have to roll over, but what would be something that would be worth setting a goal toward, but really making it happen and really getting the commitment, both of your own commitment as well as your board, to be able to go, yeah, this is not just something that we're talking about. This is something that we're going to actually do. But just please, please, please make sure that that is just beyond arm's reach. That if I was reaching out for something, yeah, I can go like this and get it, but I can't reach 6 feet away. Please don't set your organization up to lose. Only set your organization up to win. Build off of that. Allow that eccentric wheel, if you will, to start spinning and get that momentum behind it. Creating winning teams. I was working with the president of a savings and loan in his 6 direct reports. And we were doing pretty straightforward management development process. And about a couple weeks into the process, I gave them all a sheet of paper and said, would you guys write down the top 4 or 5 goals and objectives of the organization? And would you please put them in priority order? When I collected and compiled the information, there was 27 distinct entries, with the president's first and second not listed as higher than 4th by any of the guys that reported to him. And I literally watched all the blood drain out of Bill's face because he had prided himself on being a master communicator. And I think if I didn't say this already, with the exception of one person who had only been a member of the top team for 3 years, everybody else had been a member of the top team for more than 7 years, if you can kind of get a mental picture of who I was working with. And so when I kind of saw these results, and by the way, that's not unusual results. I've done that with other organizations as well. I said to Bill, I said, Bill, let me ask you. I said, if there's this kind of diversity of opinion among you guys who are allegedly running the bank, what would I get if I talked to the tellers and the platform people? And if they don't know what you're trying to achieve, how can they possibly help you do it? I said, I don't know too many ne'er-do-wells that wake up in the middle of the night and say, I can hardly wait to get to work today so I can really screw things up. I said, I don't. I said, but if we can take all the energy that people are already bringing to the table, and we can really harness that against the top 4 or 5 goals and objectives, I said, what's reasonable to happen to those results? And he said, they'll improve. I said, okay, you got that one right. Let me ask you the next question. If we can take these improved results and feed it back into this energy pool, do you expect the energy level to rise or fall? And he said, oh, it'll definitely go up. I said, okay, if the energy level goes up, what do you think is going to happen to the results? He said, they'll even get better. I said, Bill, it's that simple. I said, I'll be the first to admit we're not talking rocket science here. It's so simple, that's why it actually works. Something to think about. With vision, there's direction. With direction, there's confidence. With confidence, there's urgency. With urgency, there's focus. With focus, there's improvement. With improvement, there's belief. With belief, there's passion. With passion, there's energy. With energy, there's momentum. With momentum, there's cooperation. With cooperation, there's collaboration. And with collaboration, you and all chapter members all win. Thank you, everybody. Happy
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Stay healthy, and let's hear some chords ring.
Yeah, all right, bye.
Doug,
Bye.
thank you. Rob, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
So thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Chapter President's class. I think Doug did a fantastic job, and we had a great set of participation going on. So if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out to Doug Brown. You can find his email on the screen here, or you can reach out to him through, I guess, the Mid-Atlantic District website. Or you can contact me and I can get you in touch with him. Again, my information is right here on the screen as well. And feel free, please, by all means, reach out. We want to get you the help you need in order to be successful with your chapter.
I'll follow the sun. And now the time has come, and so